Hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you to our studios here. With me, of course, in the studio is our dear brother Jay Smith to discuss yet another one of those interesting topics. This time, we are calling this particular video series that has to do with the critical assessment of the history of Islam, if you wish. We're calling it Gibson's latest discoveries. Now, what are we talking about here? Dan Gibson, if you've been watching any of our previous basically video series on the unknown history of Islam, or what we called also the Qibla controversy, we zoomed in on the findings of our dear brother Dan Gibson, who did studies using the Quran and analyzed the geography of the Quran and discovered that there is something interesting when he focused on the towns that supposedly surrounding the the community of Muhammad and Mecca and so on and so forth, and discovered that it's much further north than you probably would assume it to be, meaning that Mecca, as we know it today, is way south. These towns and those historical stories that Islam or the Quran is trying to present talk about stories of individuals or towns or people group that are much north. Later on, of course, he discovered that Petra is the ideal location for such area. In fact, he would argue that Petra could be the original basically place of the birth of Islam, or what we call the original Mecca, if you wish. And we took it from there and we began to explore certain things from his own assessment and analysis, so on and so forth. So this is an ongoing, by the way, research by Gibson. He's going to discover many other things. Today, we are going to unpack the most recent discoveries that he have basically revealed, and we want to definitely take these extremely important findings and give him a much wider platform as well. That's the reason why we're calling it Gibson's recent discoveries. And as a result of this, expect more series along these lines as more and more evidence or discoveries will arise. Dr. J. Smith, thank you again for joining me. This is always exciting series, and people really has been complimenting us on many of these information that we've been sharing.
Well, this is it is a joy for all of us, because if you're talking about history, because of the fact that it happened in the past, it needs to be investigated. And we always say the historical critique, we want to look at names, dates, places, and events. Those are the four things: names, dates, places, and events. Of course, we also want to look at times factors. So when we have what Dan Gibson has done, and this is why we thank Dan Gibson for all the great work he has done, certainly between 89 to 2004, but as he's continuing up until 2019, he's still coming back. And we're going to do a number of these. As you say, this is now December 2019. We're going to be doing this in the spring of 2020. We'll probably do another one in the fall of 2020, because there is so much new material now starting to ramp it up as more people are getting involved. Not just Dan Gibson. Other people are now starting involved in this whole question concerning where did Islam really begin. And it looks like more and more what we're finding is when we read this book, the Quran, and when we look at the traditions, the descriptions in this book about these people that this prophet is having contact with, the areas that he lived, the places that he went to, certainly the kind of vegetation that exists around all this is not pointing to Mecca at all. It's pointing to somewhere much further northwest, 600 miles further north,
Correct.
The Nabatean area. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep on, you're right, we're going to keep on just bringing this new material to you who are watching this so that you can keep up to date with all that research that's going on. This one, what we're going to do now in December of 2019, will be updated in the subsequent series that we're going to do. Let's just take a look and let's understand. Now, to do that, we need to back up to what we did in our original series, looking at what Abdul Malik needed. Abdul Malik, who was, I would suggest he was a Nabatean. He lived north of Petra. He lived way up in Damascus. But he was an Umayyad caliph. He was probably the greatest of the Umayyad caliphs, ruled from 685 to 1205, and he was the one that created the whole Arab identity. Remember, we talked about this. And in creating the Arab identity, he first needed to create a man, a prophet, because the Nabateans, the Arabs, didn't have a prophet. The Nabateans didn't have a prophetic line. They didn't have also any revelation like the Jews and the Christians, who were their cousins. The Jews and the Christians, they had a prophetic line through Isaac. They also had revelation, the Old and the New Testament, the Old for the Jews, the New for the Christians. They needed to have that kind of identity. They already now controlled that whole swath of land that Abdul-Malik, by that time, he controlled the swath of land from Andalusia all the way over to India. That was an enormous amount of land, but they had nothing to show for it as far as their identity. And that's why he needed a man. And that's why he builds the Dome of the Rock. We talked about this, puts it above the Church of the Sepulchre. And we're going to introduce that a bit more. We're going to unpack that. So once he found he got a man, and he introduced him on that Dome of the Rock. That's where he introduced the name, Muhammad. He also introduced it on coins. That's another series that we've done, is looking at the coins, where that is introduced with him. He is the one that introduced it. On the same year, actually a year later, after he introduced it on the Dome of the Rock and on the protocols, he then introduces the man's name. There's his prophet. And of course, then they needed a book, because a prophet has to have a revelation. Every prophet has a revelation. Where was this revelation? And that's why the Quran starts to begin put together. And we're doing a whole other series on when the Quran, the manuscripts that have been put together. In fact, we're going to be doing a great one on looking at where are these earliest manuscripts, how many are they. That's something that we're going to really tackle, because they claim that there are not just 6 manuscripts now. They're claiming more, and we're going to look at every one of them. This is exciting. But once you have the man, then you have the book, then you need to have the place. Well, the place was already there. The place was already there. The place already existed for Abdul-Malik. That was not a problem. He didn't need a place. The place was right there in Petra.
That's right.
And the narrative today, though, does not say it's in Petra at all. They put it to Mecca. And that's where Gibson has really been helpful, because certainly not to begin with. When you look at all the evidence that we've looked at all the qiblas of the mosques, 20 qiblas of mosque, ancient mosques from the 7th and 8th century, the earliest mosques, in fact, all the earliest mosques, their qiblas, their direction of prayer, are all facing Petra. So certainly the qiblas have given that away, and that's why Gibson was so good, because he was able to go back and look at all those mosques and actually go and do the coordinates. Do all the coordinates, modern coordinates. No, so you have the Qibla facing that city. Then you need also to look at what else has been found. Now, once you look for this place, you need to go back and see. Let's look at Petra, and let's look at some things that I would like to specifically pinpoint. Let's put the slide up here to see what we're talking about. Petra. One of the great things about Petra is that it fits the biblical account.
Right.
When you look at Hagar and you look at what's happening with Abraham, we know that Hagar is in a valley. That's very clear. We're going to one mountain and then to another. In fact, the whole tradition in the pilgrimage of going back between Safa and Marwa are those 2 mountains that supposedly Hagar went to when she was there with her son Ishmael. Abraham comes to talk to her, and he turns the corner out of sight, which is exactly what we find with the cliffs in Petra. The Thanea, or turning to the right.
The Thanea, that means something bent, basically. Yeah.
And that's the sikh that you find there in Petra. But let's take a look at map of Petra. When you look at that map there on the right, you can see that if we were to expand it a bit, you can see that there is a valley there. You can see that this valley does not exist in Mecca. There is a parallel valley which does not exist in Mecca. You can see, as you look at the circled area in red, that's the Christian quarters. That will be where many of the aristocracy, that's the ones who actually did speak Aramaic. And it was fascinating. They are the ones, we're going to get into this later, how that they are the ones that actually give us Quranic Arabic. The Quranic Arabic that we see in the Quran, that's unique to the Quran, that everybody notices is different than the Quran that is used in Hadramaut area in the south, or the Hijaz area in the middle part of Arabia, is used in the north, and it comes out of this Nabatean.
And by the way, the most popular reading is found from the reading that is in the north also. Out of those canonized reading, the most famous one that is found most of the time in the later Quranic manuscripts comes from the north.
Okay, so let's go back to that map again and let's take a look there. When you come down and you look at the areas, I just want to get you a visualization of the map. Let's just take a look at another one here. Here is the another map that's very much the same thing, and you can see when you look at the map that there is a temple of Uzza, and there's also a temple of Dushara. So these Al-Uzza, who is Al-Uzza?
Well, it's Al-Uzza, one of the gods, or the idol gods.
Actually, she's a goddess. It's a
or
female.
Goddess. Yeah, I mean, basically, that's what I mean. It's like an idol that was being worshipped, and it was mentioned in the Quran. Al-Lat wal-Uzza.
Al-Lat wa al-Uzza.
Wal-Uzza.
Chapter 53, verse 19 and 20. Surah 53.
The story of the incident that is known as the Satanic Verses.
You're right,
Yeah.
which Salman Rushdie made famous with his book called The Satanic Verses. So there you can see the Al-Uzza, and then if the orange, look at the orange area, that is the temple of Dushara. So I want to pinpoint these two real quickly. There's the temple of Dushara on the left and on the right. That is there. You can go see it. And it refers to Dushara. So who is this Dushara? Well, Dushara is the Nabatean god, the great god Dushara. And that's why a temple is dedicated to him. And sits right there in the middle of the valley. What's fascinating is Dushara is his formal name. But his generic name is Ilah.
Ilah. Yeah. God. Just a God.
Which is Allah.
Yeah.
Allah comes from Ilah.
That's right.
So here this Dushara is the God that we see in the Quran. Do we not find it in the Quran?
We do. I mean, there's multiple references. And by the way, I would argue that when you say the reference right now, I'll explain why Allah could be taken out of Ilah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I have it open here, and I'm going to just read this now. I'll read it to you. This is in Surah 3, Ayah 18. It says, Allah bears witness that La ilaha illa huwa.
No God but Him.
No
And
God
he
but
used
Him.
Ilah, La ilah illa huwa, meaning this Ilah is the unique one that represents Him.
So this Ilah is the name, actually, is a generic name for Dushara. So the God that we see in the Quran, that's repeated in chapter 37, verse 35. That's also repeated in chapter 47, verse 19. Three places that I've just looked up real quickly. I'm sorry, you looked them up real quickly, and we found them real quickly. Yeah. There may be more than that, but those are three you can look at. So that's chapter 3, verse 18, chapter 37, verse 35, and chapter 47, verse 19.
Now, I would argue that because of these kind of verses, that the definite article was added because there is no God or no Ilah but Allah, basically, that you add the definite article al to ilah and becomes Allah, technically speaking.
There's ilah becomes al once you put al there.
My theory. Again, I wouldn't want people to go ahead and attack me over this. But I'm saying it's very obvious to me in Arabic that once you add the definite article, la ilaha, meaning there is no God but Allah, meaning this is the one.
Well, if there is another God, then you have to throw out chapter 3, verse 18, because it said there is no other but this God. So this is Allah, because this is the only God that's referred to in the Bible.
Right.
So you, by definition, it would surmise that they're talking about this God, which is a Nabatean God, and that's his temple that we saw, that we showed up there.
Right.
But I'm going to go one step further. I want to show this slide here, because this slide, if we look at put it up there, this slide here is Al-Lat. Now, is not Al-Lat the feminine form of Allah?
Yes.
In Arabic?
Exactly.
So Al-Lat is the feminine form of Allah, which is the generic name for Al-Uzza. Al-Uzza is the goddess, the consort of Dushara, who is Ilaha, which means that Al-Lat and Al-Uzza is the same goddess. Al-Uzza would be the formal name, and that's why we have here, you can see the pictures of her. She is well known in Nabatean culture. She is found in many, not just in Petra, she's found in other cities. She's also found as far away as Palmyra. So all over, she is very popular. She is the wife of Dushara, who is Ilaha, who is Allah. Al-Lat is her generic name, as Ilaha or Allah is the generic name for Dushara. So here you have Dushara, the god of the Nabateans, has a wife. Now, do you see a problem with that in the Quran in chapter 6, verse 101?
Well, I mean, certainly there is a big case to be made, but let me play the devil's advocate right now. I mean, I would like for you to unpack this. You know, somebody come back and push against this. Wait a minute, the Quran was very specific. Al-Lat wa al-Uzza, two, not the same one. What would we say about that, for instance?
I would say that they didn't look at their history very well, and they didn't actually go back, just like they didn't look at, they shouldn't have even used an ilaha, they should have used dushara. There's the problem. Whoever wrote the Quran were writing it, looks like in the 8th century. They were not going and actually unpacking it. It looks like, in this case, they did not understand what the God of Islam.
So technically what you're saying, there is the feminine God and the masculine God.
Feminine God and masculine
Husband
God.
and wife.
Except if they'd really gone to Petra, they would have seen there are actually two different temples. And it's according to the Nabatean writings, this is the wife of Dushara. But in chapter 6, verse 101, it says very clearly, he, that's referring to Allah, is the originator of the heavens and the earth, so it has to be Allah. How can he have children when he has no wife? The Quran is very clear that God has no wife. The Quran's very clear that God has no wife.
Right.
Then they shouldn't have used ilaha, should they?
That's right. So
they shouldn't have used Allah.
when you use that, then you're getting into something that contradicts the declaration here.
It contradicts the declaration. It looks like the God of Islam, according to what we're seeing from Petra, the God of Islam from Petra did have a wife. Her name was Aluza, whose generic title was Al-Lat.
Al-Lat.
And of course, Dushara would have been the god of the Petra, whose generic title is Ilaha. So really, we're talking about a god who, in the Quran, that only has a title. That's not his name.
That's right, and that's very clear, by the way. I mean, no one can argue that this is his proper name. It's just a title.
It's just a title, the god. I'd like to know his name.
Yep.
Can you see? It's great as we're doing unpacking this, and we're going to get even better. We need to go and we need to shut this one down for now. What I'd like to do when we come back is to start to look at the different stages of the Hajj. Can we find these stages in Petra?
And that will be interesting. So thank you so much, of course, for this exciting introduction to this series. And as you can see, there is more and more discoveries are being made, and we would like really to keep up with those latest discoveries. That's why we called it Gibson's latest discoveries. There is a reason why we're calling it this way. Obviously, in every video, as our standard, you'll read the description of that video and you'll know what exactly is covered under that particular video in case you're interested just in a specific thing to watch. Until you join us next week, have a blessed day.